Greetings and welcome. I'm Dr. Yogesh Malhotra, Yogi, from New York State-based Global Risk Management Network, LLC, the New York, USA-based venture capital and private equity firm. Welcome to the ConnectAI Masterclass on existing and emerging sectors for artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, defense, and law enforcement. Thanks to Professor Mirza Jamal for his kind invitation to present the masterclass for the ConnectAI event, and to the ConnectAI teams of Masa Medon, Anushka Beltram, and others for coordinating and delivering the event as well as the current masterclass. It is my pleasure and privilege to be among you today for this event. Thank you and welcome again to the masterclass. I welcome your questions on Zoom live chat interface in course of the presentation, and I'll attempt to answer your questions in the Zoom chat. In the concluding 5-10 minutes or so, we can take remaining follow-up questions on live Zoom video one-on-one. You are also welcome to contact me later at my email address and LinkedIn address shown on the next slide. Today's masterclass builds upon a journey started with the beta version of the first web browser in early 1990s. We started by building world's top digital site, search engine, social network, the world's first, foremost, and largest global digital transformation network. As the digital pioneer for CEOs, CXOs across Silicon Valley, Wall Street, Pentagon, and global firms, our digital ventures and practices are adopted and recommended by world leaders such as Microsoft founder Bill Gates and PricewaterhouseCoopers Vice Chairman CEO Ellen Knapp. Global learning institutions such as Harvard and MIT. Our client roster includes world-leading finance and technology firms such as Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Google, IBM, Intel, as well as US and world governments and the United Nations World Headquarters, as well as the US National Science Foundation, to name a few of them. The hypertext links shown here on this slide provide access to our industry expert papers and presentations, including the MIT AI Faculty Subject Matter Expert course portal that I built for training and guiding industry executives from companies like Google, Microsoft, Tesla, and Silicon Valley firms for the MIT Management Leadership Executive Program on AI and Strategy roadmaps. Princeton University presentations for the quant finance trading presentations, as well as the fintech crypto presentations, where I had the opportunity to present amongst many of the crypto pioneers leading the crypto revolution, as well as the State of New York cybersecurity presentations, sponsored by the New York State Governor and the New York State CIO for the last few years. Our US Air Force Research Lab Commercialization Academy, CEO CXO networks, that is the digital social enterprise ventures, such as AMLexchange.com, Brin.com, and C4iCyber.com are all accessible open to everyone for knowing, building, monetizing AI machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing, robotic process automation, and robotics, as well as advanced data science and quantitative analytics, cybersecurity, cryptography, cryptanalytics, quantum computing, quantum cryptography, and risk computing skills, technologies, practices, teams, and networks, among others. We continue to bridge the gaps between business and technology, data and knowledge, and theory and practice. As Fortune magazine had written about me about 20 years ago, we continue to create the digital future, looking back over the last 25 to 30 years, by obsoleting what we know before others do so, as Inc. magazine, focus on technology, had written about our ventures. This specific focus, create the digital future by obsoleting what we know, has also been adopted and referenced by the US Defense Services like DISA, as well as the Department of Defense Secretary, among other worldwide leaders. Our digital practices and ventures are ranked for global worldwide impact among Nobel laureates like Herbert Simon, Black-Scholes, Markowitz, Sharp, and our digital CO6 e-learning ventures are recognized among programs such as Harvard and Wharton by AACSB, which benchmarked our e-learning ventures, forecasting if the future belongs to the traditional e-learning providers or the futuristic providers, amongst which we were the pioneers. AACSB, for those who are not familiar with it, is the Global Business and Accounting Schools Accrediting Organization recognized worldwide by all top elite business schools. Starting with the beta of the first web browser, we advanced digital CO6 practices beyond data processing to managing dynamic change, uncertainty, and complexity. Inspired by AI genetic algorithms pioneer, Dr. John Holland, in 1995, then at the Santa Fe Institute, the global Nobel laureates think tank on complex systems, many of the most renowned physicists, which we reference in some of our presentations and expert papers. We pioneer R&D-led practices on what has become recently known as human-centered AI, with the acronym HAI, and meaning-aware AI. Also building on that, we are building the foundations of meaning-aware quantum computing, going back to our foundational work on quantum uncertainty, which is the foundation of the future business strategy and business performance practices based on our point of view. Our first peer-reviewed research paper on human-centered AI and meaning-aware AI was published in the year 2000, more than 2 decades ago, in the top-ranked artificial intelligence journal, the Expert Systems Journal with Applications Journal, and became the top-ranked paper by the journal at that point of time. The worldwide press, such as the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, reviewed our digital ventures and practices as global industry benchmarks for world-leading practices on self-adaptive complex systems and chaos theory. These are the paradigms which were pioneered by the Santa Fe Institute, but we have been leading in Santa Fe Institute going back more than 20, 25 years in building global self-adaptive complex systems practices. Again, going back to the inspiration from John Holland, who was at the Santa Fe Institute in 1995. John Holland, for those who may not be familiar, is one of the original pioneers of artificial intelligence known as genetic algorithms. We continue to advance global digital CO6 practices on models, algorithms, and data. With the acronym MAD, given what we have observed and shared on our networks in the recent years, in the post-COVID era, for instance, to manage dynamic and adversarial uncertainty and complexity for most optimal business performance in the historically unprecedented uncertainty era, as we are observing across diverse sectors, whether it is global financial sector, technology sectors, geopolitical, organizational evolution, and so forth. We have been pioneers in many of these practices, going back to the first beta version of the first web browser, which we used to build the world's top digital site, search engine, and social network. Again, welcome to the AI Cybersecurity 2022 and beyond. Foundations, insights, and trends. We call it FIT, F-I-T. Beyond models, algorithms, data, with the acronym MAD. The focus is how to get all these global digital CO6 enterprises and networks and ventures fit beyond MAD based on the observations shared in the last 2 or 3 years since these ventures have been launched. Therefore, in this masterclass from the Global Digital CO6 Networks, AMLexchange.com is the AI Quantum CO6 Networks. Brin.com is the Digital Quant CO6 Networks. C4iCyber.com is Cyber Crypto CO6 Networks. So these are broad categories, but you'll see a solid blend because we traditionally go back to the beginning of the web in not choosing to follow a stovepipe, because all stovepipes can't help solve the real world problems. The real world problems are akin to messes. The term which was used by the pioneer of operations research, Professor Dr. Russell Eckoff at Wharton School of Management. He was the advisor of my advisor in PhD going back 20, 25 years, who was the founder of information systems and global pioneer of IT strategy at that point of time. Therefore, what we aim to achieve here in course of this presentation, sharing with you our latest observations and practices along with these ventures, which can help you apply these knowledge and practices, is to help you effectively preempt the risks which we see in the current environment posed by the latest and greatest adversarial threats by drawing upon our latest contributions to advancing not only US global and national defense and space capabilities, but also having led the Silicon Valley VCs and tech CEOs, as well as the Wall Street hedge funds with the $1 trillion assets under management. Prior to that, with practices adopted by worldwide organizations across all industry sectors. Now, related to the notion of human-centered AI and meaning-aware AI that we pioneered over 2 decades ago, which is now central focus of AI at institutions such as Stanford University, is our development of associated digital human-centered social networks. The Silicon Valley VC, Roger McNamee, recently implored Silicon Valley to embrace human-driven social networks that empower rather than exploit users as the next big thing. And AML Exchange is that next big thing. McNamee was one of the advisors to the Facebook CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, in case you're not familiar with McNamee. As pioneers of world-leading print BizTech, which is business technology integration, which we pioneered based on the review cover story written by CIO magazine at that point of time about our coinage of the term BizTech and the BizTech network, as well as the global knowledge management networks, as the knowledge management pioneer, ranked in the top 3 knowledge management scholars practitioners going back about 2 decades and more. So we were invited to guide Silicon Valley VCs, CEOs 2 decades ago, and we guided them on how to build digital enterprises for the wild web. That's what we called it at that point of time. But no one could have imagined how wild the web is going to be today, about 25 years later. And that's where we have distinguished ourselves by not picking or choosing to focus on data. Everyone chose to focus on data as they're doing now, but we focused on the real problems of how to manage change, uncertainty, complexity. Now, many of these terms that you are seeing thrown around like the extreme event black swans, they are building on the work we have done going back more than 25 years ago. Now, having pioneered human-driven and human-centered AI and cybersecurity practices, as well as the global digital networks, we continue to lead advancement of human-driven digital CEO 6.0 networks that empower rather than exploit users. Our US Air Force Research Lab Commercialization Academy Ventures, AML Exchange, C4I Cyber, building on Brin.com, the world's first, foremost, and largest global digital network, they will save you 90% or more time, cost, and resources. Regardless of where you are in your journey in applying AI, cybersecurity, quantum computing, in knowing, building, monetizing such digital practices, including AI and cybersecurity, as well as intersections thereof. Leading the post-COVID global digital transformation of life in terms of digital search, learning, and work activities. Now, we have pioneered all these 3. Google came to us as the pioneer of search engines. ASUS ranked amongst as pioneers of e-learning ventures, which were sourced by Harvard Business School MBA program to launch their MBA leadership content on process excellence at that point of time, in which we led worldwide practices. Work activities in which we have not only pioneered the foundation of what we now understand as the social digital World Wide Web and social digital enterprises, are quantitative mathematical structural equation models built going back 25 years ago when I was working on my PhD, have been adopted by worldwide organizations like NASA and big banks, amongst others, to build their own modeling and scientific practices. Now, we advanced digital entrepreneurs. I was amongst one of those more than 3 decades ago. And entrepreneurs. I happen to be an accidental digital social entrepreneur, didn't choose to be one, but became one having founded the world's top digital site, search engine, social network, and the foremost, first, and largest global digital transformation network. Now, at this point of time, we are focused on creating the digital social creators like founders, CEOs, such as Elon Musk. Now, many people kind of self-label entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs. We do not use any labels. Let the world kind of describe what we do, which is a reflection of our not trying to boast, quote unquote, as to what we are. We are what we have already contributed to the world, and our actions and track record of build practices, networks, and ventures applied and used worldwide speaks volumes, regardless of what we can say. Now, as United Nations headquarters advisory expert on human capital, intellectual capital, and social capital, we have been building latest cyber finance trust framework based digital practices, networks, and ventures. Now, these are built on our worldwide practices leadership amongst the big three global IT, global banking, finance firms going back more than 30 years ago when I was working as a AI algorithms strategist. AI has been a fancy name. It depends on what you call it at any given point of time. But at that point of time, I was the algorithm strategist for the Forex arbitrage, sitting in Hong Kong on a project for a French bank, working for one of the biggest IT software consulting firms, leading those practices before the master algorithm was even known at that point of time. Now, Norbert Wiener, the founder of cybernetics, some call it cybernetics, defined cybernetics as the control and communication in the animal and the machine. Now, that notion of cybernetics, complex systems and self-adaptive systems which can survive and thrive on the edge of chaos, that underlies our latest ventures, email exchange, C4R Cyber, as well as prior Brin.com, with focus on C4I cyber command and control supremacy, which, based on our observations and practices, we think of that as the critical and necessary prerequisite for both AI supremacy and quantum supremacy, which could remain unrealized myths otherwise. We would also like to correct the shown MIT Technology Review article headline on this particular page from the issue mentioned here. We would like to substitute humanism for Buddhism, as Buddhism, as well as all other religions, are founded on humanism, which essentially underscores human being is being human. Humanism is where Buddha meets Norbert Wiener, the founder of cybernetics, underpinning communication, command, and control of human machine systems. That core precept unifies East and West ideologies, clearly recognizing distinction between humans versus the non-human machines, while optimizing for respective strengths and weaknesses. It underlies our R&D and scientific model of meaning-making human as a scientist, underpinning autonomous self-learning and self-control. In today's era of misinformation, fake news, and deep fakes, Buddha's words articulated thousands of years ago are more relevant than ever before, which clearly underscore that Buddha was one with both East and West notions of self. He stated, "Believe nothing, no matter where you read it or who said it, no matter if I have said it, unless it agrees with your own reason and your own common sense." That is the essential foundation of zero trust architectures for dynamic adversarial uncertainty. And that is the precept which I have used as the opening for many of the undergrad and grad courses I taught in my earlier life as a professor across various programs like Syracuse, SUNY, and as executive education faculty earlier at Carnegie Mellon, Kellogg, and more recently as industry expert SME faculty, as AI faculty SME for programs like Princeton and MIT. Now, we continue to advance beyond the hype of AI and quantum computing, building cyber risk and uncertainty management practices that can withstand dynamic adversarial uncertainty. Now, there are two aspects to this: dynamic and adversarial. The dynamic focus on uncertainty is what we chose starting with the beta version of the first web browser. The adversarial focus has been intertwined with that. Therefore, our work going back 25 years has been building at national and global levels the foundation of R&D and practices of not only AI and cybersecurity, but how the two play together and the interplay between the optimization, building things cheaper, better, faster with automation and latest notions of what we call AI at this point of time, which is primarily focused on the deep learning neural networks in this era, as well as cybersecurity, which goes back to the earlier time. Based on our foundational R&D practices, we have seen worldwide organizations, including CIOs of Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, as well as worldwide, the biggest organizations around the world, like Goldman Sachs, emulating and building practices, which you're going to share on the subsequent slides. Now, such dynamic adversarial uncertainty is evident in case of many events, including cyber and ransomware attacks on solar winds and continental pipeline, as well as the more recent Log4j attacks, among others, which you are going to see on these slides. The current ConnectAI masterclass on existing and emerging sectors for AI, cybersecurity, defense, and law enforcement will equip you with the understanding of latest trends, industry-leading insights, as well as foundations of our frameworks, which are reviewed in worldwide media, press, across academia, policy practices, on which we have been building and continue to build world-leading practices since the advent of the World Wide Web. Our USF Federal Ventures advanced global digital CXO practices, helping you save to 90% time, effort, and resources in knowing, building, monetizing high-tech ventures, while building them upon cyber resilience engineering, risk management foundations that we have pioneered across industry practices before they've been picked up by others in headlines. We're going to show you from the most recent weeks in a while. Having pioneered both human-driven AI and digital networks R&D, our digital ventures are advancing global and national defense and space and homeland security practices beyond cybersecurity and cyber risk management to dynamic adversarial uncertainty management, enabled by adversarial command and control and counter-adversarial command and control, or as we call it, AC2 and CAC2. And that is the focus where we have been advancing the Joint Chiefs of Staff who lead our defense CXOs, CEOs, and leaders in this country, beyond the vision of the future advanced battlefield systems, joint all-domain command and control, to the next generation of ABMS, joint all-domain adversarial command and control, as well as joint all-domain counter-adversarial command and control, enabled by C4I, cyber crypto, EMS, the electromagnetic spectrum strategies and their executions. Having examined and analyzed such applications in diverse contexts over 25 years, our control doctrine, quote unquote, that's an interesting concept which you can see on our social networks like LinkedIn. They represent the elusive theory of everything. You may remember Stephen Hawking in search of that, while our focus has been building on the work of other quants coming out from quantitative finance, such as Emmanuel Derman, another physics and author of My Life as a Quant, who headed Goldman Sachs quant strategies and recently had been leading Columbia's financial engineering program. Now, this theory of everything in terms of a control doctrine, which goes back to my work in early 90s, starting in my PhD, is applicable to human-machine systems, human systems, machine systems, as well as most socio-technical systems, such as global healthcare systems, global financial systems, and global defense space systems, governed by the socio-psychological sciences, computing sciences, organization sciences, network sciences, natural and physical sciences, and combinations thereof. Now, this control doctrine resulted from a quarter-century quest, advancing and extending computer science-based information theory, which is applicable to electronic, digital, and analog bits and bytes to integrate with human meaning construction and sense-making processes underlying human-centered AI and meaning-driven AI. Control doctrine spans the AI cybersecurity and AI cybersecurity systems, spanning the range of self-control of truly autonomous systems to compliance control of assistive and augmented AI systems to manipulative and coercive control of social engineering, such as you are seeing in case of global attacks using ransomware, malware, and remote command and control using remote access Trojan acronym being RAT. Our industry expert keynotes and presentations and LinkedIn social media blogs and other prior social media blogs go deeper into specific context-sensitive applications of the control doctrine. Our prior R&D presentations building industry practices, such as at Princeton University, have already developed applied understanding of cybernetic complex adaptive systems practices based on both feedback and feed-forward loops, encompassing simultaneous learning and unlearning processes. Related prior AI cyber quantum industry innovations include open systems finance and model risk arbitrage practices, advanced at presentations such as at Princeton University, which have advanced upon other leaders and financiers' work, such as reflexivity theory proposed by the financier George Soros, who also had presented at Princeton earlier. Having reviewed the key pragmatic, applied, and practical foundations of our digital practices and ventures, and shared illustrative examples of latest real-world scenarios and trends, we shall now delve a bit deeper into the 2022 and beyond trends characterizing where AI and cybersecurity practices are headed in the future, as well as how they are increasingly intertwined as AI-cybersecurity and cybersecurity-AI. That is AI cybersecurity and cybersecurity AI. AI cybersecurity represents the evolution of AI and related machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing, robotic process automation, and robotic systems, such as autonomous driving cars and unmanned aerial vehicles, as they're called UAVs or drones, designed for cyber risk and resilience engineering to preempt adversarial attacks and hacks in order to ensure uninterrupted business continuity and sustained operations. Cybersecurity AI, in contrast, connotes the evolution of cybersecurity and related cryptography, cryptology, and cryptanalytic technologies that are enabled by AI, ML, DL, and NLP technologies, such as deep neural networks and or reinforcement learning, for example. Building upon the pragmatic, applied, and practical foundations, we share with you related insights with the respective references. These models, algorithms, and data, MAD, insights help you recognize how AI, ML, DL technologies enable deepfakes to metaverse. That is, spanning fake identities to fake realities, which compound the global cyber threats and vulnerabilities. We also help you recognize and realize the C4I cyber command and control supremacy by integration of adversarial and counter-adversarial command and controls, which in our thinking are essential precursors and prerequisites for AI supremacy as well as quantum supremacy. Problem one, focus on models, the M in the MAD. All models are wrong, yet algorithms use models. That is a very big problem known to everyone, or should be known to anyone or everyone who even talks about models or reads about models or writes about models. To solve this problem, although a lot of people have been still debating or articulating the above lesson, if we may call it a problem, we have already pioneered model risk management practices at Princeton University presentations. Building on those model risk management practices, we have also combined our focus both on AI and cybersecurity, focused on black hat, offensive and defensive cybersecurity. We have advanced it to model risk arbitrage. It is just like in the financial markets, you can play short, play long, you can play both sides. Model risk management is how you defend your networks, making sure not to get stuck on groupthink or one specific view or one silo. Model risk arbitrage, in contrast, plays on the other side, since it is a million times challenging to defend than to break systems. Because in the network's point of view, or the network's paradigm which you're building, going back to the beta version of the first web browser, building global networks of CO6 practices, you just need that one weak link, one tiny little link. Everyone talks about people, processes, technologies. The hacker mindset Last decade, we have focused on understanding how systems fail, how to make them fail, and how to make sure to sustain them. That builds on our prior 2 decades research and practices, which are recognized amongst Nobel laureates, uh, focused on understanding and helping everyone understand why systems such as knowledge management, AI, quantum computing fail. Now we are at a point, we have already advanced beyond that point, while the world still is catching up as we have been doing in the past 20, 30 years, and the world does get caught up. Therefore, I would advise, please focus on the things we are discussing. There are no courses, no books. When we started, there were no courses, no books on digital and many of the paradigms. We built the practices, books and courses came later. And our observation is you will see some books and courses coming later, but we build the practices in the world seems to be following those going back to 25, 30 years. Now, problem 2 is about algorithms. There is no master algorithm. Different tribes have different masters. Therefore, please deploy common sense making and intuition, as AI does not have any of them. Now, this particular insight came from the MIT AI machine learning strategy program, where I was queried by one of our industry executives from China. And I think in those days, basically, we were hearing a lot about the master algorithm and the book on the bookshelf of the Chinese head of state. Therefore, that person asked me, I think this is the old paradigm master algorithm. Where do we go in the future? You know, having worked on algorithms as an algorithm strategist, going back more than 3 decades ago, we have informed this perspective here. The question here is there is no master algorithm. And I think if anyone reads this book closely or the specific author closely, would come to the same conclusion. Incidentally, I believe the author of this particular book was pitched the same role for one of the top hedge funds, which I was also pitched at that point of time. But I went on to work with some other ventures with other friends and colleagues, which I've been building through my networks, including the AI machine learning community from MIT and so forth. Now, problem 3 is about data. All data is about the past. All decisions are about the future. Therefore, advance beyond prediction to anticipation of surprise. What you will find fascinating is you will observe this particular thing in the latest and greatest last 2 weeks or 1 week's CIO magazine article, Data Future. Now, people are coming to this realization 25, 30 years later, since we have advanced the world beyond prediction based on historical data to anticipation of surprise. Hit the future of finance.Org. We have been defining the future of finance as emulated, picked up in practices by our global network members, such as many of the CEOs, CXOs from companies like Goldman Sachs worldwide, who we have already seen applying many of these practices. Problem 4 is about risks. Now, that's a very big issue. Risks is opposite to returns. And I think many of the smartest people across industries, like Warren Buffett and others, they recognize if you manage risks well, that's how you have returns. But if you do not manage risks well, you blow up all the returns. As in the Wall Street, we have seen the whipsaw, the up and down curves, which kind of shake the markets. And there are people who kind of make millions, then lose much more than what they make. I think the same paradigms apply not only in the global financial era. You've seen these same paradigms apply to the enterprises earlier, to the global enterprises. You've seen the same paradigms apply to the global finance and defense as well as geopolitics. We are seeing a lot of these plays and observing and sharing our observations through the various networks. Problem 5 is about AI supremacy. AI supremacy is a myth, and so is quantum supremacy. Now, we had enough of this term, AI supremacy. These are people living in silos. They spend their lifetimes working in AI supremacy or just looked at the world in one silo, one course, one program, and so forth. Now, having done PhD with twice the PhD credits, as well as having taken 5 masters, I have not relied upon any single course. In fact, most of my work has been obsoleting everything that is written in the books. As I said earlier, we are not following the books and courses. We create real-world digital practices adopted worldwide. And the books and courses follow the time, given the life cycle of knowledge creation to knowledge obsolescence. And we are playing on both ends of that. As I shared with you about the Inc. magazine interview, which talked about what our paradigm of knowledge creation and knowledge obsolescence, what we call as the ongoing process of creative destruction, which I think Schumpeter is one who's very well known on that, but we are applying those practices. There are a lot of academics, practitioners, scientists. They've contributed to our observations, insights, and foundations, but we go into actually applying and seeing the results of the application. And we're seeing lately the latest, call it buzzword, call it hype, or call it a real thing, depends upon where you're coming from. Therefore, the metaverse is the latest and greatest, call it anything. Now, it is nothing in a word. The question is, it's not what the word says, but what actually happens in there. There were most metaverses, in fact, if you take away all the layers of the commercial garbage or other garbage, are basically about essentially connecting the various minds in virtual communities worldwide. Now, we have been doing that earlier. Software magazine wrote about Brent as the community of managerial minds worldwide. That was 20, 30 years ago. But I think people can sell what they want to sell. They'll come and they'll go. But we do not have any, primarily any commercial interest. We are here to observe the world, to create new knowledge, and to obsolete that knowledge faster than anyone before, so that the practices we build are applied worldwide, as we have seen for the last 20 or 30 years. Our gratification is not in what we make out of our practices and ventures. A lot of our work is pro bono for US world governments, cabinets, parliaments, and so forth. Therefore, it is not what we get, it is what we get to contribute in terms of building the world and feeling gratified and grateful for having had the opportunity of being the world's first knowledge creating company, which happened to not only create, but see its knowledge applied in worldwide practices. Now, we shall discuss the specific insights in the context of global financial systems, as finance is a leader amongst all sectors in advanced applications of high-tech and engineering technologies and capabilities. Furthermore, given their extensive application and ongoing innovations, specific technological innovations in finance often serve as a precursor of similar innovations in other sectors, such as global healthcare systems and global defense and space systems, after a lag of time, sometimes months, sometimes years. Many of the enterprise applications and related technologies are also common across finance and healthcare, along with the respective focus on regulatory, privacy, confidential concerns, which we observe both across AI and cybersecurity and both. The defense and space sector is of particular interest, given the much larger scale of systems engineering complexity, as well as time and space complexity and uncertainty. Now, although these problems are very complex and very large, impacting the world, but we have found that the focus of the strategists in defense and space has been focused on the world where they have lived, in the world of what they can see, the kinetic, the physical systems. Having founded our enterprise on the global World Wide Web, digital enterprise, the digital native, cloud native enterprise, we have focused on what others cannot see, basically in the C4I, cyber, crypto, EMS domains, primarily where the top leaders in defense are focusing now. We have been trying to push those practices over the last 1 decade or so. Following discussion on the models, algorithms, and data, MAD, related insights, help you recognize how AI, ML, DL technologies enable deep fakes to metaverse, fake identities to fake realities, compounding cyber threats. Hence, it is important to recognize that all of such enabling technologies are intrinsically multi-use. Specifically with reference to the dual-use discussions, we are seeing too many dual-use discussions across various global, national, geopolitical issues, but most people, I think they know the words, but they do not know the depth and do not really understand how any single technology, going back to the days of my PhD, when I think having worked on computers from the beginning to the mainframes, to the web and so forth, we were discussing technology adoption and use when the World Wide Web started, from the early social digital networks, which we built, the top digital search engine, social networks, and the top digital site, followed by most organizations and institutions. I was discussing, sitting with this pioneer of information systems about technology. And we're discussing about technologies like computers, and the observation which we shared is that even a simple thing like a pencil, which is a writing instrument, can be used for writing, or it can be taken, it can be used to take someone's eye out. The question here is, it is not the specific technology, just like the inventor of TNT, dynamite, and so forth, Alfred Nobel. I think if you hear the person behind the name of Nobel Prize. I think he also was thinking of all the good that can come from the stuff which he was doing, which he was thinking will kind of help advance the construction and development of the world. Later on, when he found the same stuff has been misappropriated or appropriated by people with different mindsets for destroying the world, he, I think, out of most likely of his guilt, happened to create the Nobel Prize so that it recognizes the more positive contributions of the various scientists and technologists. It is up to the user, including whether you're a strategist, technologist, financier, or engineer. It is up to each one of us how we plan to deploy the power of technologies for the individual and collective good. And it is for each of one of us to understand when it is not happening. So, therefore, we resolve problem one of model risk by deploying model risk management and model risk arbitrage. My 3 Princeton presentations: advanced practical applications of true uncertainty, also known as Knightian uncertainty, building on world-leading knowledge management and dynamic adversarial change management, R&D, leading global practices as the world-ranked knowledge management scholar practitioner. Now, I will not go in detail in the slides, but I'm going to give you enough references so that what we have observed, practice, applied over the last 30 years, we want to see that this knowledge gets known, applied by everyone in the world for the greater good of mankind. That's what our primary incentive, motivation, and focus is, including this particular presentation, which I'm making right now and sharing with you, is motivated by the greater good of the world, the greater good of all. We recommend you, again, to know the math, including statistics and probability underlying your models. More importantly, know the limitations of that math. Most importantly, use intuition to accommodate above limitations. Now, we recommend you to visit these sites, which I've shared with you here, that how your black swan could be my white swan. And the point here is what the world sees 5, 10 years later. We already have observed that, applied that, and we have moved on. By the time the world comes to knowing, recognizing, applying that, we are on to the next big thing, as we are doing right now. We build smart minds using smart tools smartly. Please see my LinkedIn article, and you will observe the focus on one of the world's smartest quant, who I shared you about, who was heading the Goldman Sachs quant strategies and at the Princeton Columbia program on financial engineering. Now, this particular article was inspired by, at that point of time, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, by Renaissance Technologies and Deshaw. These are one of the top 2 known hedge funds. They were looking to quantum computing for an edge. And this article kind of relates to how we can advance beyond AI, ML to quantum, or what they were calling quantum mental computing at that point of time. And my industry interviews with global worldwide media press practices, such as Institute for Supply Management, have already talked about some of these things earlier, including an earlier interview, I believe, sometime around 2007, 2008, with Business Insider from India. Therefore, this is a continuous theme. A lot of people kind of having focused on AI, a world driven by robots. So that's what we focused on early 90s. When I interacted with John Holland, I asked him specifically how we can create self-adaptive complex systems using AI and other smart technologies. The dream of most technologists at that point of time was to get humans rid of the equation. And that's where many of us came from. But the longer I have worked in this area and the longer I have reflected, built practices, and lived through last 25, 30 years or so, I am coming to respect the human aspect more and more. I think we are underutilizing humans and overhyping technologies. And I think my observations are being borne out by many of the observations being made not only by scientists, strategists, technologists, as you will see in the latest, greatest headlines from the last weeks, 2 weeks, and so forth. Our cyber finance trust practices advance the emerging future of finance, helping finance researchers and practitioners recognize cyber risk as the predominant risk that can subsume most traditional financial risks, such as credit risk and market risk. In a nutshell, once you connect everything to the net and put everything on the cloud, everything what you have there, all your data, models, algorithms, as well as what happens with them is not 100% under your control. Now, the control is a myth. Even when you have that stuff sitting in data centers with all the sentries and guards. You never knew who was hacking them, cracking them, stealing them. You're seeing all these headlines again and again. The issue here is what you see in terms of the Fort Knox walls, which could guard the gold nuggets or the gold bars sitting in the big federal banks. None of those things are going to help you safeguard when these things become digitized, whether you call them cryptocurrencies or digital data or digital models or digital enterprises. That's where the real game has been, where we have been involved in terms of learning and helping others learn and apply. We propose 2 new financial innovations: model risk arbitrage for open systems finance. The model risk arbitrage is profit maximization strategy for the global financial markets, characterized by uncertainty and complexity, related feedback and feed-forward loops across time and space in non-deterministic open systems finance. Now, to cut the short of it, I would recommend, please read Reflexivity Theory by George Soros. That's a fascinating observation, but our work kind of precedes reflexivity theory before it became known by at least 20 years or so. This was part of my R&D program in the time of my PhD days, when I was talking about the learning and unlearning feedback, feed-forward loops in the IT/OR context at that point of time. Therefore, this work is interesting and relevant, where the simple idea here is based on the cybernetic control mindset. Do not only think of one, but multiple feedback and multiple feed-forward loops operating simultaneously. And these are not something which are passive. They're active humans at all levels who could be participating in creating these loops, which we need to be aware of, which I think many of you are. And that is what we call the non-deterministic open systems finance. And non-determinism, that comes beyond the prediction-based control, as well as having gone beyond the probabilistic models of stochastic control and so forth. What we are seeing is we need to understand how to manage uncertainty and complexity for things that cannot be specifically mathematically predicted by any one specific given model. We draw upon our controls frameworks, R&D, leading organizations such as NASA and big banks to examine socio-psychological control of social influence and cybernetic systems controls, with systems engineering focus on AI governance and control. Now, unlike many others who have either spent their lives in social sciences or computing sciences or network sciences or the physical sciences or the quantitative sciences, our work encompasses all of them. In fact, I believe we are the ones, based on the insights I'm going to share with you today, you can look for yourself and see that if you want a cohesive framework of systems, systems dynamics, systems of systems, networks of networks, our framework and all our presentation publications are the most coherent set of knowledge being applied and evident in practices worldwide, which are available there for you to apply as you wish. Therefore, we help CEOs, CXOs understand emerging cyber risks, increasingly intertwined with financial risks, shedding light on emerging cyber risks, threatening survival of national and regional economies, business enterprises, information infrastructures. So when you hear about things like the data being held by the biggest financial institutions or the great credit card agencies being stolen or hacked, or by the various government agencies, the intellectual property, other data being appropriated by the state players and so forth. Therefore, a lot of people are looking at specific single incidents, specific single instances. What we are observing are the same patterns at a bigger, larger scale, which are being powered by technology on both sides. On one side, we have technology such as AI of optimization, making things automated, cheaper, better, faster, not necessarily intelligent. Now, that's what we have been asserting for a long time, and the world is coming to realize that many of these things are in fact dumb. And in fact, some of the scientists and smartest people at MIT have specifically called out, this is not intelligence. These systems are pretty dumb. Look at some of our presentations we've shared earlier. We help CEOs and CXOs understand that ML technologies deployed for automation and optimization may also provide the adversary, very important, with deception, manipulation, and attack capabilities to launch sophisticated cyber attacks and require risk mitigation. Again, this is coming from the silo mentalities. Call it DevSecOps, DevOps, or whatever it is. The issue is that DevSec and Ops, ML and Ops, all those people operating in their own silos, trying to connect them now. We come from a systems perspective, systems of systems, though we do not think this way. They've been building these building blocks together and how they not only work separately, but more critically, how these work together. Because in our perspective, it is the weakest link that matters from a technological perspective, from a people perspective, process perspective, and so forth, from a geopolitical perspective, from a financial perspective, healthcare perspective, the weakest link. That's critical to understand. Once you get that, having worked with darknets, actually hacking systems based on authorization and authorized darknets for thousands of hours, you would come to recognize, just like me, it's a million times easy to break a system than to design a foolproof system. There is no foolproof system as far as I know. The problem here is the reason there's no foolproof system is all the systems are built on systems of systems, and many of these different systems are not under your control. It is one small app somewhere by some third-party provider supply chain. It is some work by some contractor. It is some operating system by some company, some big tech company somewhere. It is some semiconductor chip by some other company sitting somewhere. It is how all those things work together. That's critical. And all these people, what I've seen in my interactions, many of these companies have been our clients like IBM, Google, Microsoft, and Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, as well as institutions like Harvard, MIT from the beginning days of web. But we see them operating in silos. They would build a new fancy building for crossing the silos, but the silos remain and the buildings come and go. And it is a sorry state of affairs. But we have been trying to bridge these gaps, even though we chose to not have any building from the beginning of this company. Incidentally, we had people coming from the world trying to meet us. They caught hold of agents in New York City, flew down to the airports like in Florida, and had a meeting with us. They asked, where are your buildings? None. We don't have any buildings. Now, we were the original virtual company, which pioneered virtual organizations, having built the world's largest virtual community of practice. Therefore, that is our foundation. Though what people are trying to do here post-COVID, we have been not only living or preaching that reality, we've been collaborating worldwide, having millions of worldwide users, hundreds of thousands of contributors, more than hundreds of PhDs we had the fortune of collaborating in building many of these practices from ground up. With focus on adversarial uncertainty and time and space complexity, we build CEO CXO recognition of critical significance of resilience and sustainability of command and control systems, including adversarial command and control and counter-adversarial command and control. We help CEOs understand that AML technologies deployed for automation optimization may also provide adversary with deception, manipulation, attack capabilities. Now, that's a key point, therefore I'm reiterating that. You can download our latest industry presentations and papers from my SSRN, Social Science Research Network, author page. Now, these various publications, there are 30-some presentations, publications there. They have resulted in about 84 top 10 research development rankings, which you will see cross across all the silos of practices and courses and curricula, which I've mentioned, including a top 1% author ranking with more than 11,000 downloads. Feel free to download as many of them. There's no incentive here for me, but to make sure this knowledge gets applied worldwide, practices which we love to see applied. Having published the first paper on human-centered AI, in recent years, I had the privilege of advising the MIT management leadership executives, as I shared a while ago, in deploying AI strategy roadmaps. Now, this particular online guide I built in order to do two things. First, connect the theory with practice. That's what we've been doing going back more than 20 years. And that's what you will find if you access this online guide. You can access it at the two URLs. One is in the LinkedIn, one is outside, accessible directly. And you will see hundreds of articles, papers, which you have linked up there, hundreds of free books, courses, and so forth, which can give you a start if you are not started in MIT, this AI strategy and its execution, as well as also you can start at any point, because we've been advising some of the CEOs and so forth when they get asked us questions, just like I shared with you about the CEO from China earlier. We had another CEO from healthcare who asked what to do in the future, and we give advice here based on the companies we work with and the CEOs, CFO teams. We have the privilege of guiding, and the CEOs from many of these teams who happen to seek our collaboration and guidance, as well as invite us to work with them in building new ventures we've been doing in the recent focus on CXO teams that we've been guiding. Given applied understanding of deployment of AI algorithms. Now, I mentioned earlier about the master algorithm. You can also pull down that advice which I shared, because what we do when we share some advice or build some practice is we try to make sure we can publish that so that it becomes useful to not one person, but to everyone in the world, literally. And that's where basically you will see what's the foundation of these, and you'll see how you can advance beyond the myth of the master algorithm. Okay. Therefore, I think once you recognize that myth, you will also understand how many of these companies, Netflix is making big news with a 40-50% drop in its stock price recently. Nothing to state about any judgment or point of view about these companies. Stock prices go up and down, companies go up and down. If you look at the Dow Jones, which everyone follows, for instance, you may find about 12 companies, or maybe less than 10 maybe now, which have been there since the beginning. All companies come in and go, indexes kind of go on, Therefore, the question here is, we help you understand Netflix. Netflix is a fascinating company. They've done some very interesting work, including one of the $1 million prizes I believe they won. But incidentally, if many of you know who track industry or follow their work, is that they did not apply this $1 million prize winning entry in actual production. Therefore, we need to clearly distinguish the world of theory, practice, awards, prizes, medals. That helps me recall an article in Harvard Business Review when I was publishing about the earlier focus on social networks in the social media and what inspired people to actually misuse or abuse those networks at that point of time. There's a fascinating story from Harvard Business Review. I believe the author was Al Ficone, and the article's title was Punished by Rewards. I think this particular article is not only a reflection on the disconnect between theory and practice, which I believe is critical to bridge, which I've been doing. We've been fortunate to do, having had the privilege of doing so. But in fact, if you see Punished by Rewards, you will see that if you're trained, you had foundation, you have published or researched in human, organizational, learning, intelligence, theories, practices earlier, that there are fundamental caveats which you can see in the current state of AI. Reinforcement learning, for instance, is very hot in AI right now. But if you go back and see reinforcement learning, read that article which I shared about you. I think hopefully it will help advance beyond the brittle reinforcement learning which we have now, which can blow up models and other institutions and so forth, to the future of more resilient RL, for instance. Now, we advance the global digital practices beyond algorithms with a focus on sense making for a world characterized by risk and uncertainty, to bridge theory and practice, spanning silos. That's what I've been discussing all along, nothing new here. Therefore, we resolve problem 3 by advancing. All data is about past, all decisions are about future. Now, that's where most are coming now, as you're going to see in a headline from CEO magazine from last week or so, to where we have been. Look at these websites. There's a lot back there. Our R&D program actually started this. The future is moving so quickly, you can't anticipate it. We have put a tremendous emphasis on quick responses instead of planning. We will continue to be surprised, but we won't be surprised that we are surprised. We will anticipate the surprise. So that requires some thinking and reflection. Therefore, that precept, which you're building our R&D and practices, going back to 1993, can help you advance in successful applications of AI, machine learning, cybersecurity systems. The CIO magazine interview, again, I discussed about anticipation of surprise there. That was a decade before, about 10, 12 years before the JP Morgan CEO made headlines and in the congressional testimony that models are backward looking. Brint is the pioneer of the future of finance amongst other practices. Now, we focus on finance because finance leads other practices, as I shared earlier. We have been deep into the healthcare sector, where we go back more than 20 years. We've been deep in the defense and finance. We've been followed by the world leaders, including COCS of Army, Navy, Air Force, going back 20, 25 years. Finance is where we started a long time ago. Incidentally, coming from the manufacturing and process engineering, where I was leading one of the Japanese car companies in my first life as an executive engineer in production engineering, process engineering, where in my day life, I used to build production engineering lines as well as the production assembly lines. In my nightlife, after the first shift, I used to sit and work on the mainframes, working and learning programming like algorithmic language at that point of time, ALGOL, where I started. But our latest stuff which we have been doing has been recommended, applied by industry leaders from companies like Goldman Sachs, Microsoft, PwC, and so forth, as I already shared now. Now, AML Exchange Venture, it welcomes digital CEOs, CXOs from global startups to trillion-dollar firms to know beyond past data, to future decisions, actions, and performance. We are building the future of search, learning, and work, as I shared with you. Therefore, we are building what Silicon Valley thinks of the next big thing. All right. Therefore, we encourage you to also use these resources in building not only your technologies, practices, ventures, but more critically, the mindsets. The challenge is in the mindsets more than other things where we are seeing big issues. Okay. Similarly, C4I Cyber Venture focuses on leading CEOs beyond prediction, black swans, and uncharted territories to advance C4I cyber supremacy, which I mentioned earlier, is a precursor and prerequisite to both AI supremacy and quantum supremacy. Otherwise, those are myths which may never be realized in practice. Our framework of production, distribution, consumption across time and space with efficiency, effectiveness, and optimization helps CXOs connect the digital virtual financial domains, such as in case of finance and trading and markets, spot trades, forward contracts, futures, and options. Now, these things, although are evident and visible in finance, but they also are applicable across all other domains. Primarily in the case of time and space complexity in defense finance, where we are working with very archaic, obsolete notions of kinetic, lethal doctrine, which has proved its inefficacy facing unrestricted warfare and other doctrines. We've got very smart people in the world, very, very smart adversaries. We need to respect our adversaries for how smart they are in helping us understand how we can advance our knowledge of how the world really works today, based on what we see them doing and learning from them. Now, we have been kind of leading learning from many of the companies we've worked with. You're fortunate to work with some of the smartest people in the world, learn from them and guide them. We developed the Cyber Finance Trust Framework to aid CEOs' understanding of how ongoing digitization, virtualization, and transformation of inter and intra-enterprise networks are contributing to the convergence. Now, convergence is the key risk here. That's where the fragmentation of risk, the silos in finance, we've seen that earlier. We are seeing it in the geopolitical realms also. We are seeing it in defense and space. And I think this is also applicable equally in the healthcare sector, as well as the enterprise technology sector earlier. The problem is the silo-based focus on risk. And that's a big challenge. I think if you go back to our presentations in the AI ML program in MIT, we've been bridging many of these silos here, which you cut across the primary and secondary value chains, because many of the business models, they fundamentally shift where the world is going. You've seen, everyone knows about Amazon.com. But how about the baseball company, the most known baseball company that started as a butter churn company, which has nothing to do with baseball bats. But that's how fascinatingly the business models are evolving as we are looking further. And we wrote the book on the digital business models in collaboration with the world's largest global digital virtual community of practices, which we created more than 20 years ago. From an offensive cybersecurity perspective, cyber risk vulnerabilities that can result in adversarial control of AI and quantum technologies imply the urgent need of command control supremacy. Already said that. Therefore, these ventures advance our focus on adversarial uncertainty. Look at some of these references I've written there. Please check those out. Now, this is the EMS strategy document from the Department of Defense. Fascinating stuff. Now, I had been priming this discussion, and I remember this document was shared a week later after I was priming the discussions. Therefore, this is a fascinating document to study how we are coming to grip with the EMS. There was C4I, cyber, crypto, EMS, beyond the AI and quantum. Think of all these, how they connect together. We introduced the fintech risk metaverse of fragile digital cyber finance markets enterprise for CEO6 understanding. Now, this was the invited keynote. I believe I delivered it in 2015, national keynote for the chief legal officers, security officers, risk officers. And it's a framework which will help you understand how many of these things play across time and space. We are connecting finance cyber, but you can map this onto healthcare. You can map this onto the defense and space and other. And think of the metaverse. Metaverse is nothing new. We were the ones who created for the first time the virtual community of minds That's essentially what it is, what it will be. Other gadgets, gizmos will come and go. Okay. Therefore, we now share examples of CISO practices. Therefore, some examples are credit risk, market risk, liquidity risk. This is a JP Morgan project where I guided them, the managing directors, portfolio managers, and quant teams to manage $500 or $600 billion fund of funds. PRMA curriculum, people who are in risk management. This is one of the big, most known risk management organizations. While participating in the executive education PRMA program at Kellogg School of Management, I advanced the curriculum based on the practices in building in the risk modeling, risk management space. Many of the practices built in finance, copied on in cybersecurity, then copied by all other domains. But there are fundamental issues there. People just are good at plugging and chugging models and math. But the key challenge lies in really critically thinking the boundaries of where those models blow up. And they blow up the specific domains and related constituents and stakeholders. Therefore, the VAR, value at risk models, conditional VAR, tail VAR, expected shortfall, extreme value theory. And now, in many of these cases, basically, I was also discussing in my presentations that we need to advance beyond the value at risk model, which has been blindly, I state again, appropriated by most worldwide organizations and applied in cybersecurity, which is going to make cybersecurity systems fail fundamentally, because the conceptual real world behavior of those risks is very different. Many of the risks which are kind of considered external are internal and vice versa. If the notion is the terms are called exogenous, endogenous and notions of risk. And I think you see some of these things in the later observations I share from the recent press headlines and so forth. Again, alternative investments portfolio discussion, advancing the Sloan Management Review article. The discussion was on Bayesian versus VR. The article was smashing some economist firm sitting in New York City, arguing why Bayesian or VR is better than others, totally oblivious that these are not either or things. Therefore, where people go into math, we go into logic. We focus on logic before we get into math. We have been deep in math, advancing mathematical models, but I think more critical than knowing math, as I shared earlier in one of the Princeton presentations, know the math. More importantly, know the limits and assumptions of math, where it blows up. Math in your models, in your data, in your algorithms. And most importantly, apply intuition, which comes from what they call drinking from the fire hose, or the University of Hard Knocks, where many of us kind of live and learn every day. The CFA Society keynote on AutoML, that again focuses on the hedge fund CIO practices, the chief investment officer. There's a good slide deck of 107 slides, but the basic idea here is automation learning. I'll reference this later, therefore please keep this one in mind. You can download this from the link I've shown up here. Journal of Financial Transformation, a special issue on alternative capital markets. Here's one of my articles, one of the recent articles on what they now call alternative risks related to alternative assets and finance. AI augmentation, model management, important article. The important point here is many of the scientists, they realize where things can blow up. But we have seen the practitioners in finance, in defense and space, blindly, unquestioningly adopt, appropriate those models and scale them up to everything before they kind of saw the blow-ups happen. This is critical article. Therefore, please read about Jeffrey Hinton's focus. He is one of the key pioneers of what's called the backpropagation algorithm, gradient descent, and so forth. The fundamental problems, fundamental issues with all of these mathematical models. But you need to know before you blindly copy and paste these things and apply in your practices. That's where you need much more smarter minds to make correct, effective use of the smart technologies which we are seeing right now than ever before. Journal of Operational Risk paper, correcting the network systems and controls, again, bridging the silos, where we are building the standards and practices to advance our professional cybersecurity standards, education and practices. Have a look at that, download it from my SSRN page again. Straight Street HQ presentation, where we are taking the cyber finance, cyber warfare, connecting both and like connecting the domains of financial systems and the global defense and space. Here is what we pioneered, the cyber finance trust framework, which underlies pretty much everything in the worldwide digital domains right now, including all the social networks, so forth. Going further, I think the couple of concepts I want to make sure here I note. The control doctrine I noted earlier, building on the focus on control from self-control, autonomous control to compliance, identification-based controls, as well as question-based manipulation-based controls. All those things we are seeing happening in the AI domains now. But the fundamentals are critical, what technology you use or not, because you can apply many of these things in technologies and even otherwise. That is a key observation to share. The first postdoctoral quant finance thesis on cyber finance, risk and uncertainty management on the computer science and network computer security systems engineering. This advanced on my prior R&D, which got recognized fascinatingly amongst others from quant finance AI, as I shared earlier, like Herbert Simon, Markowitz, and so forth. Therefore, you can download this from here. This is a key document because this document connects the socio-technical systems focused from social sciences to the technological natural sciences, because people live in silos, and here is where the disconnects happen. When people appropriated quant finance models of socio-technical domain to cybersecurity, that's where things have been blowing up. And we have been asked by NAIC, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, which is the regulatory body for all insurance companies, to build an expert paper, which also you can download from that page. Now, the issue is that it is not the models, it is which model is applied, which models are applied, because all models are wrong. Some are useful, but it is important to know where the use ends and where that use becomes abuse, disuse, or misuse. That applies to data, algorithms, and models, including all other information. We wrote the first document on that going back 25 years. This document kind of brings it up. Therefore, it's an important document here. Read it up. My recent LinkedIn blog post, transitory inflation, time space. Now we are advancing the time space notions, inspired by the defense and space strategies for the next 30 years, trying to advance their time space focus based on our understanding of time space. I want to briefly mention, many of you coming from the computing paradigm know about the computational time, computational space, and so forth. We are trying to create bigger and bigger data models, what you have. Now we are seeing a backlash for smaller models and smaller data. Those things continue. But the idea here is it's not only computational complexity or computational time-space complexity. It is not only the physical or geophysical notion of time-space complexity like the different space. There are many different notions of time-space beyond that. In the financial realms, you can connect the geophysical and financial realms. In the past, present, future, finance is a great discipline. Therefore, this particular document I shared with you that provides a template how you can understand, create, and manage portfolios of risk, not across a singular time space as you see now, but across multiple times and spaces. Beware, there's network time. If you look at the NTP protocol, I discussed in one of my presentations. There's a network space. The way things connect or travel through net is very different than the geophysical notion of how things travel. There are various notions of distances, which some of you may know from computing, the algorithms and so forth, which are applied in error correction detection, in telecom, Hamming codes and so forth. Therefore, have a look at those. Therefore, that will give you a broader perspective of how you can think of space-time, not only in terms of the geophysical space or the networks, time space or the financial space, but how these connect and operate together, because they are operating not together, whether we acknowledge them or not. That is an interesting insight to remember. Now, time space continua, again, have a look at this one. Next one, this is where I correct the time space complexity. Look up my related discussions on the LinkedIn network, on the ABMS JAT C2, where I'm relating those, or look at the keynotes, one of the recent State University of New York cybersecurity presentations, as well as the earlier keynote for the global panel for Space for Web, Space for Women, where I had the privilege of delivering this keynote on AI quantum uncertainty for space and so forth. Now, quantum minds as self-adaptive complex systems. These are some issues we've been discussing, which someday maybe you might see in books or not, doesn't really matter. But these are founded on our work going back to the early days of web. And this is how we understand the future of AI, resilient cyber. All these will connect with a focus on what is being human, what is being not human, and what are the respective strengths, weaknesses, and how we can connect those. All right. Therefore, have a look at these. ML Exchange provides the tools to build quantum minds and digital futures, and that's what we articulated what we do. Therefore, have a look at some of the insights which you will find not only in the search templates, but in the C4I cyber search engine. Okay. Therefore, we help you accelerate business performance while minimizing execution risk. Again, going back 20 years on how we built this AI machine learning paradigms, as well as the cyber crypto, not separately, but together. Okay, I think we build digital enterprise to manage risk uncertainty, monetize for value and impact, stimulating meeting of minds, metaverse, we discussed that. Have a look at some of these. I shared this with you earlier. Dynamic adversarial systems across dynamic time space, discuss that. Common sense and sense making are most critical for managing risk and uncertainty. Now, in the next 5 minutes or so, 5 to 10 minutes, I'm going to zip through some of the content headlines. Therefore, revisit this PDF deck or presentation, or both. I will provide this PDF deck on my SSRN page. You can download it from there. Okay, and you can listen to my presentation here because I can only cover so much in helping share what we have learned, applied over the last 25, 30 years now. Therefore, okay, question is that from latest industry headlines, we delve into 22 and beyond trends characterizing where AI cybersecurity are going together. Now, I stated this earlier, but I'm showing some examples from the last week or 2 weeks here. Therefore, the latest trends reports, they say basically we are seeing a great explosion in adoption of AI amongst business leaders for reinventing their business processes, business models, products and services, and so forth. Therefore, let's jump to the next one. More important than AI, applying AI is to start with simple solutions and knowing, first of all, when AI is not the right solution. AI needs prerequisites, as we all know. Visit my MIT AI guide to see what you need for AI, the data, the process workflows, and the culture, and so forth. Therefore, this is nothing new, but it's a bullet point here in CEO presentation. Therefore, most AI assumes prediction and control, which is not the real world. And you need to understand whether you are trying to aim for prediction and control or both, and how these AIs can help you. Again, in simplest solutions, start with statistics, operations research, machine learning, NLP, DNA, and so forth. Prediction assumes past represents future. The question here is, if your past does not represent future, then how do you go from past to future? Look at our work on future of finance earlier. Good, relevant, correctly labeled data. That's where the big challenges are going to lie. The question here is, you can do all you can from the normative purpose, making things right, but the adversarial aspect of the world, which is there, is going to throw a wrench in there. We're going to see data, algorithms, models manipulated, messed up so that they can crash systems, which already is happening. And you can see evidence in real world headlines. And that brings us to the IEEE spectrum, 7 revealing ways AI fail. Now, we've covered these things before, and I would recommend that you see all of them: the brittleness, bias, explainability, certainty, common sense math. Look at the Princeton presentations which I shared about you before, the AI journal paper we published in 2000. That's what I would recommend, because we offer resolutions of these things. And I think many of these problems are because of silos, the fragmented notion of the understanding the knowledge applications. What we offer to you, I believe, is the only cohesive framework in understanding how the past, present, future connect, how the various technologies connect, how the technologies connect to applications, and so forth. Okay. 7 revealing ways AIs fail. Now, the question is, this is not intelligence we discussed earlier. Statistical pattern recognition and recall is not intelligence. Nothing new here. Therefore, I would recommend review these very carefully. This is a very important article. I would recommend read it. You will find it here. I believe here. Look at this one. A very important article. A real world check. Okay. Therefore, Watson Health, semi-autonomous driving, same issues here. Nothing new, but why these systems fail and how you can build better resilient systems. Tesla, challenge to Musk, Daniel Kahneman. Now, based on how systems fail, I think you'll find some interesting discussion on my LinkedIn social network, where I have offered a channel to Daniel Kahneman and Elon Musk. Both of them, they are both Tesla fans, and I had offered them that I'm willing to test their hypothesis. Basically, this is how I live my life. I test my hypothesis in real world messes and see if you can survive to tell your story. Question is, I have survived earlier, and I am willing to test these things with them if they are willing to do so. So my Princeton University presentations, AI, machine learning, control, I think that's where I have discussed this, download the presentation so you can see the context, where I'm coming from here. I've lived this reality, which many of these models have yet to see. Look at the story up here, the headline. Therefore, these are examples here. You will find the discussions on my social network. The key point here is, it is the weakest link here. The weakest link in Tesla, I'm not sure it's AI or not. I think time will tell about that. But right now, the battery, it's like a sitting time bomb which can blow up your Tesla. Therefore, when you think of 9/11, where you can take planes full of fuel and crash them into buildings, what do you do with someone going in a Tesla? Take a Tesla, crash it into a tree, and the person will just cease to exist. That's the key challenge and the weakest link in this system, as I see. Now, therefore, what is coming in the future? MLOps, machine learning operations. I recommend you look at some of these references I'm sharing with you. This is a fascinating area where we need to industrialize and automate these things. We cannot take the craft-based approach, as happens in the case of all IT people. Nothing new here, but applied to AI. There's some examples I've shown you, references. Please have a look at them. I'm showing you MLOps in the 3 primary clouds, which are used by many companies here, and I recommend having a look at them, all right? Therefore, zero trust, this is a very big thing. Understanding, applying, having a zero trust mind is more critical than having any framework. But once you have the mind and you understand and see these things, how to apply them, as I got the opportunity of applying for the state of New York, for the top digitized county, because many of those things come with, okay, they have network segmentation, zero trust, but that's where, once you get things out of the box, that's where the fun starts. You recognize that you have to build these things yourselves. Because once they're out of the box, they're linked to other systems, networks. That's where you need to figure out how you can actually create zero trust and segmentation, micro segmentation, so forth, okay? Space and defense, ABMS, JAD, C2, the realism of the threat and risk, that's a key issue. The threat is not real, or in tabletop exercises, it's not real. In simulations, it's not real. You can do paper trading of money, it's not real. But when I started learning about trading, I put everything online, including most of my savings on the line. I traded about 250 companies, did 3,500 trades, up and down, long, short, to survive and learn, to really live risk before I could talk about risk. Okay, how else do AI, cybersecurity connect together? The GANs, generative adversarial networks, deep fakes, used for impersonation, social influence, social engineering. The fundamentals remain same if you go back to our work on social influence, control, social engineering. The means are different. Technology is a medium. That's all it is. Beyond foundations and insights, these are some other big headlines. We do not have time to discuss this, therefore, but I would recommend you to kind of look at all these headlines. I've reviewed them multiple times, as I think this is what I scan. The kind of patterns you need to scan in the world, they're coming from all directions. Your AI ML algorithms or sentiment algorithms can't really make sense of them. The question is, how do you make sense of the real world? And how do you apply that in your survival and thrival for your stakeholders? That's the key challenge. So this is primarily the AI. This is primarily the cyber side, and where AI and cyber connect. Therefore, the question here finally comes down to, we started from human use of human beings and humanity and humanism. And our virtues, as we see in one of the recent movies on a cyborg, which is the Ghost in a Shell movie, where we have a human brain implanted in a manufactured synthetic enhanced body made of robotic like parts, Therefore, the last quotation in that, I think that reflects on where real singularity lies. The real singularity is of humanity and humanism. And that cyborg in the end basically says, my mind is human, my body is manufactured. I'm the first of my kind, but I won't be the last. We cling to memories of the past data, quote unquote, as if they define us. But what we do defines our future, which is distinct from past in most cases. My ghost survived to remind the next of us that humanity is a virtue. I know who I am and what I'm here to do. Therefore, we have covered the trends to insights to FIT. Hopefully, we have advanced your focus beyond the madness of the crowds on models, algorithms, data, to advance to fitness landscapes. How do you create fit systems that not only survive but thrive in the most adversarial environments? And that's where I plan to conclude my presentation, and I welcome you to contact me We have about 5 minutes remaining. Therefore, I will stop the video at this time and let's connect together in the live one-on-one Zoom video Q&A.